Welcome to another exciting edition of Flipped Video Notes. Today's topic is on the Gupta Empire, the golden age of India. So you want to make sure you either have a hard copy of these notes out in front of you, or you are looking at an e-version which you can access through Blackboard. Please remember to file and make a copy. Just want to remind you to briefly look at the map. You need to identify a few key places, and then the rest of the notes is pretty straightforward with a fill in the blank and a couple questions that you need to do. So without further ado, let's get started. Here we go, the Gupta Empire. Before we start, I always like to locate myself in place. So here we have a world map. I always look for Africa, and I identify the Americas, because those are my two hemispheres, the Western Hemisphere, Eastern Hemisphere. And here we have the continent of Asia, and I always look south. We have the Indian subcontinent right there, where the cursor is. We already reviewed some geography. The Indian subcontinent, it is cut off, isolated from the rest of Asia due to geographical barriers like the Himalaya Mountains and the Hindu Kush Mountains to the northwest. Previously, we did have a few civilizations in India. We had the Harappans living along the Indus River Valley. Unfortunately, they disappeared with really no explanation. Historians have not discovered that yet. And we also have the Indo-Aryan migration or invasion into India through the Khyber Pass in the Hindu Mountains. It is the Aryans who bring along their caste system, which goes to dominate the rest of India. Culture and society, and also religion through Hinduism for the next 1,000 years until the 20th century, when it is finally abolished. Also, to review, the Maurya Empire, the very first empire of India. It was founded by Chandragupta Maurya, but the most famous king was his grandson Asoka, who we have here in the lower left-hand corner. He was a very harsh ruler. He ruled with an iron fist. He had harsh punishments for committing crimes. He fights a battle called the Battle of Kalinga, where over 100,000 troops are slaughtered, and he wakes up and sees this destruction of war and the horrors of it, and he decides to convert to Buddhism. And here we have an image of the Buddha in the center, Siddhartha Gautama, and he spends the rest of his life trying to spread the ideas of Buddhism around Asia. If we look at a map, you might want to pause it here to fill in some of your map identifications. India. Okay, China is over here. The island country off the coast of China and the Korean Peninsula is Japan. And then if you go south, we have the modern country of Indonesia. And this island here is the island of Java. And the islands of Java and Sumatra are known for their spices. And ironically, the cup of tea that I'm sipping on is cinnamon, and cinnamon was known to be, is found to grow naturally in Java. Just a fun fact for the day. After Ashoka dies, there's really no clear, strong leader to take his place. There's no, he doesn't have a son who is known to have been a great ruler, and we have the decline of the empire. People fighting with each other, and there's a number of assassinations. People are fighting for power, and for the next 500 years, there's a lot of political instability. You have lots of new groups of people, the Persians and people from Central Asia, coming into India and disrupting that traditional society that they had under the Mauryans. Fortunately, by the time of around 400s CE, this is CE or Common Era, we have another new empire that unifies India and leads it to its golden age, and we call this the Gupta Empire by its founder Chandragupta. And he's able to help foster this golden age. Again, he didn't sit down and say, I think I'm going to try and make India turn this into a golden age. No one ever says that. We come up with these ideas of golden age looking over long periods of times by historians. But what Chandragupta does is he sets up a strong centralized government, yet he left a lot of the power in the local levels. So just like in the United States, we have a national government, and they do have a lot of power, but this would be as if we gave most of the power to the mayor of Alexandria, or the board of supervisors for Fairfax County. Those people, you probably have a better chance of knowing your local leaders than you do the President of the United States. So you trust them. And if you're trying to rule over a large area, the less work you have to do in following the rules of making sure each village is obeying and paying their taxes and being good citizens, that's less work for you if you're an emperor. So that's a good thing to have. And also we see a lot of trade flourishing and farming and intellectual achievements, as well as aesthetic architectural ones, which we'll mention a little bit later. Daily life in India, most of the people during this time are farmers. Again, these are led by the eldest male or patriarchal families. And it is also important to remember that most of the people in India at this time are Hindu. It's most of the people living today in India are Hindu. Their society, their culture, their religion permeates every single aspect of their life. There's a lot of intellectual achievements, inventions, developments, creations of Indian culture, which allows historians to support this idea of a golden age. Kalidasa was one of India's greatest writers. He wrote tons of plays. Just like we have Shakespeare is considered England's greatest writer and playwright, Kalidasa is one of India's greatest writers. Some other achievements they create: the calendar, they perform surgery. Fun fact, they developed a vaccine for smallpox, which actually comes from cows, and in Hinduism cows are considered sacred. They study astronomy. They prove that the earth was round and not the center of the universe. It took Europeans thousands of years to figure that out. And they also create pie, or they discover pie. And I don't mean pumpkin pie like I'm itching to have right now. I'm talking about the mathematical pi, 3.1459, etc., etc., etc. That mathematical number that's really key to understanding geometry and higher level calculus and algebra and all that fun stuff. Here we have a couple posters that students created about the achievements of the Golden Age. We have pi up here. The Earth revolved around the Sun. 0. Medicine. Another one, I like this one because it shows infinity. It's a sideways 8 infinity sign. And it also shows the architecture, the artistic achievements. Down here at the bottom is the famous Hindu temple of Angkor Wat. It is absolutely massive. It's a huge temple. And then you see these 5 very tall, I think they're called beehive domes. I'm not exactly sure on that. But next class I'll show you pictures of the detail of the sculptures that are on these temples. And they're absolutely beautiful, and they tell stories from Hindu creation myths, stories about the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata. It's beautiful architectural achievements to have done. Also during this time we have trade. They mainly followed 2 avenues or 2 routes along the Indian Ocean, so traveling along the coast of India, and the Silk Road. And remember, we talked about the Silk Road being a misnomer because there's lots of different paths that you can take to trade between China and all the way west towards Rome. And they did trade in specialty items like wood, gold, diamonds, and ebony. Ebony is a black, very, very dark stone. If in old pianos, the black keys were made out of ebony and the white keys were made out of ivory. So you have ebony and ivory. This is a map of some of the Silk Roads. Starts all the way out in China. Here was silk, and then I like it because it shows different pictures of what they could travel with. And I like this map because it also demonstrates the different routes they can take, and also the geographical barriers they had to deal with, like a desert, Himalaya mountains. Notice they're not trying to cross the Himalaya mountains. They're following the very base of the mountains, going around it. Okay, but this stretches over 12,000 miles from Constantinople all the way to China, and it also reaches India. Unfortunately, like any great empire we study in history, there is kind of like the swing of a clock, a pendulum swings. You know how a grandfather clock swings back and forth, or you can think of it as a bell curve, or swinging on a swing set when you're 5 years old. Eventually, you have the peak, or the zenith, that's a fancy word, zenith, for civilization. So the Gupta Golden Age would be considered the peak of Indian culture. And then eventually, at some point, it has to swing back the other way, or it has to go down that hill, or it has to, the clock has to go swing the other way. Just like a pendulum does, just like when you, no matter how hard you try, you can never go over, do a 360 around a swing set. You always fall back at some point. And with history, we have the same thing. Eventually, we'll have the destruction of an empire due to civil unrest, poor rulers, which leads to instability. And this is a topic that we're always going to be talking about in history, this idea of the rise, peak, and decline of certain civilizations or empires. So we're all out for today. Please remember that you can always pause, go back to this PowerPoint to make sure you have all the notes, and I'll see you next class.